everyone, and welcome to the Podcast by Army podcast, where we talk about BTS, Army, fandom, and research. We are your co-hosts, Dr. Kate Ringland and
Jhertau Her, a university student.
Yay! And
Yay!
today we're going to be talking about what is Army.
Ooh.
Okay.
Who is Army? Why is Army?
Where is Army?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good question.
Army are everywhere.
Yes. All secretive. Ooh. But yeah, what do you think, Kate? What is an army?
Oh my God. We only have an hour to unpack this.
We can do it. We got this.
We can do it. This is actually, I think, an amazingly controversial question.
Yes, it is.
It has incited whole fan wars and stuff. So
yeah, people get so mad. So mad.
There's there's I don't know, people feel very strongly about their opinions about this. So maybe we should put a disclaimer here that these are also only our opinions. And if you disagree with us, please don't troll us. Let's have a discourse.
This is also our opinions as academics and longtime armies ourselves.
Yes.
So we've been ingrained in the discourse.
Yeah, so I've seen the discourse happen on places like Twitter.
Ooh.
It's been a ride. But I actually have a survey that I deployed out in the universe. Mostly on Twitter is where I got responses from. But part of that survey was actually digging into this question a little bit about what people think Army, what they think Army are.
Yeah.
The identity of Army. But I think there's a lot of layers here because there's the personal identity of I identify as Army, and I don't think anyone can. It's not like I can tell you, no, you're not allowed to identify as Army. There's a very personal thing about that. It's part of my identity as a person is to be Army. But then there are the community aspects of it, of what does it mean to not just identify as Army, but also be an Army out in the world? And I think that those are actually two different questions. What does it mean to be in the community of Army? So yeah, I don't know. I don't know where to start with all that.
Yeah. Just to kind of add on to this conversation, I remember I got a comment on a YouTube video once where someone asked me, can someone be an Army if they don't interact with the community at all?
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think about that?
So I think that maybe is the perfect way to summarize this conundrum that I'm thinking about of sure, I could sit here in my bubble of solitude and be yes, I identify as Army. I can sit here and stream BTS music and buy the albums and watch the lives and go to the concerts, I guess, and say I'm an Army. But I think there's a secondary question of, do you have to be a participant in the community to be Army? I guess is the real question. And I don't know. I don't know if there's a good answer to that.
Well, to kind of add on to this conversation, I have a perspective that's very considerate, I guess, more considerate than a lot of Twitter armies or just armies from my own circles would give. But I believe that your Army identity and whether you are an Army or not depends on what community you are entering as an Army. So, for example, on Twitter, there's a lot of Army Twitter spaces that if you don't vote, you don't stream, you don't buy, you're not an Army, which is completely valid within those spaces because those people value those things and those people want to continue supporting BTS through those avenues. But there are places like Tumblr where if you don't write fanfic, if you don't GIF things, if you don't make transformative work, such as fan art, fan fiction, fan edits, etc., then you aren't an Army either. Because you're not participating in what the community values there. So this question is very dependent on what community of armies you're even coming from. Because on Twitter, I've shouted at people before where it's like, "Oh, you don't read lyrics? You're not an army." But that's because I value reading lyrics in my particular army space. And I believe very much that reading lyrics is crucial to being army because it's also something I value in understanding BTS.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I sort of come from. What do you think, Kate?
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I think that yes, one thing that is very true is that it's very context dependent of where you live in the community. And I think that maybe that gets back to the interesting question of if you're by yourself in a bubble, I guess you're an army of one and you can kind of be whatever kind of army you want. You're not beholden to community expectations in any way. And then that's more just like a personal identity thing versus being in a social group of army.
Yeah.
And I agree. Like, I think that there's certain expectations, and they're much more they're different in different places, and there some places it's much more a vocal, outspoken expectation. So Twitter is one of those places where people are very loud about their expectations of you in that space. And I think that the reason we see kind of drama in the discourse unfold is when people's expectations clash. So like the lyrics thing is actually a really interesting one. I actually remember when there was actually kind of a whole thing on Twitter about lyrics, because if you think about lyrics in the sense that not everyone has equal access to them. So
Yeah.
everyone, obviously not everyone is Korean speaker, not everyone has access to lyrics in their primary language.
Yes.
It's also an ability issue. So there's some questions around disability and being able to read lyrics and things like that. And so there obviously, which with everything, there's much more nuance than sometimes our conversations, especially in online places like Twitter, allow for. But I too am one of those people. I'm like, if you don't understand the lyrics and don't understand the messages they're sending out through their songs, then I'm curious actually as to what you're doing here. Like what is it for you that is bringing you to this space? Because there's a certain ethos and a certain like kind of community cultural message that happens through their music. And if you're not a part of that, then I'm curious as to like what it is for you, mysterious person on the internet, like that what it is for you that brings you to this space and keeps you in this space culturally.
Yeah, I agree with that because I feel like a lot of times when armies find each other, we come together because of BTS's music. And if you don't understand lyrics, which is a component of their music, then essentially you aren't understanding them as artists, as people. And I think one of the fundamental things about being an army is understanding BTS and their intentions. Because there's a lot of people who don't understand it and try to act like they are army, and then they go off and do something insane, like the people who try to trend things against other K-pop groups or hate on people related to BTS. Like just recently, we saw John Yoon, Namjoon's friend, who Namjoon helped make some songs, not make some songs. It was one song on John's album, and people harassed him because he's close to Namjoon and he's in relation to him. And many times, a lot of people who try to act like they are armies, they do things in the name of BTS against people that are close to BTS in hopes of harming the members and giving like a sign or some type of symbol. And I don't know, what do you think about that, Kate? It sucks.
Yeah, no, it's really unfortunate. And I guess this gets to like I feel like there's a lot of people who are what I have kind of termed like army adjacent. So people
Yeah.
who people who may or may not openly identify as army, I don't know, like some people claim to be army and don't act very army like. And then there are people who don't even actively take on the label, but they still sit in the periphery of the army communities of people like solos and antis and stuff like that. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that there's like, yeah, there's like some interesting nuance there of like, at what point does self-identifying as army versus one's behavior kind of create some interesting tensions in, like, I might identify as army, but if I'm going around harassing people that literally aren't even BTS but like are just going around harassing people, that's not like within the ethos, I would say, at least of my army community. It's not in our ethos to do that. And so it's a question of like, well, they might be identifying as army, I don't know, but I don't consider them a part of my community. And so there's interesting tensions around that, especially when you start getting to those like edges of the community where people are doing things that we may or may not agree with.
Yeah. How I've always understood it, especially since 2020, is kind of the idea of spaces and circles. So like think like one big circle is like army, is like all the things that fall under army or can be considered army. And I call that the army space. And then there's like solo stands, actual real army, people who are multis, people who are casual stands. It's like all within the space that's considered quote unquote army. But these people are different from just being army. They're like different values, different people, different like things happening, but they're all under this umbrella of where if like a random person on the street looked at it, they're like, oh yeah, you're army.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think
So
it's like, yeah, I know, I
yeah.
because I was about to argue with you and like, I don't want to call that army space. I would call that maybe more like the BTS interested umbrella, but you're right that people on the outside, people who are not in army and not in these spaces, they look at that whole umbrella and they say, "Oh, army." And so
Yeah.
we get blamed for an awful lot of stuff that isn't even on us. Like it's more these
No.
kind of periphery communities and these like edge cases, if you will.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things too where like we get included with things involving K-pop stands too. Like,
Yeah.
okay, this is a pet peeve of mine, but feel free to argue with me. But when it comes to the Black Lives Matter donations, the $1 million was from Army. We matched BTS's donation of the 1 million, and it was Army who did that.
Yeah.
It was not all of K-pop. It was not other K-pop fandoms that did that. It was only us who did
Yeah.
it.
Right.
And it's interesting to see how the label of Army gets both expanded and then um, minimized
Yeah.
as a fan, and seeing like where people do that to push certain agendas.
Yeah.
And that is only one case as well with the donation. Yeah. What do you think
Yeah.
about that?
No, I agree that it's used. Okay, so we're talking about outside the community by like mainstream
Yeah,
journalists,
mainstream media.
other
Yeah.
researchers I've seen do this. So like just people outside the community who don't have an investment or an insight into the community. Yeah, I do see the label getting both used to kind of leverage things, but also, yes, get subsumed in K-pop when it's convenient for
Yeah.
the narrative, right? So like I see this happening a lot in academic stuff of like, people trying to conflate army community business and army community behavior with K-pop community business and behavior. And
Yeah.
I get that question a lot as an academic of like, well, I see you're talking about army here, but isn't this just all of K-pop? And I am like, no, it's not.
No.
It's really not. And I sit in this awkward place where I don't sit in K-pop spaces. I don't know K-pop spaces. And so I couldn't tell you like, word for word, which is only army and which is K-pop and which is, like I couldn't do that, but I can tell you that army is a very unique community and they operate very differently than any other community I've seen. And I think that it's really unfortunate when that gets co-opted by these other labels and these people putting Army in buckets where they really don't belong.
Yeah. And to kind of go back to what I was talking about as well, just because the majority of the donation was from Army, I'm not like downplaying the efforts of K-pop stans and other K-pop fandoms to donate to Black Lives Matter either, or even just donating in general. It's just that whenever armies do something, then there's this expectation for the rest of K-pop to be dragged along with that, to be like accredited to that, when really it's like majority armies who are doing that effort and who are behind that effort. And it gets very frustrating because it's like we can't even exist as our own independent community. And we are stuck with it's like what we talked about in one of our previous episodes. I think it was the Namjoon episode, Namjoon birthday episode, where we talked about how like our fandom and like Army as a whole, we get labeled as K-pop stans, and we get like our achievements as Army gets accredited to K-pop as a whole, which is frustrating. Like we are only Army,
right? And then it's like double-edged in that when K-pop groups are acting badly, when bad things happen with K-pop groups, we also get accredited for that. So like it's like this awkward, like it'd be really nice if we could just be separate and not included and just the wall right there. It's interesting.
It is. And to kind of add on to what you were talking about earlier with K-pop stans, basically K-pop stans are very distinctly different from armies. Like there's like multiple things going on here. It's like there's armies, there's K-pop stans, like people who like a lot of different groups, and then there's people who like other K-pop groups who are like their own fandom. And when it comes to people outside of Army, there's a lot of K-pop fandoms that believe in solo stans and that have solo stans because it's like a common thing within their fandom. Like there's always this belief in a lot of K-pop fandoms that eventually the group will disband and then you'll just follow your favorite member and that's it. And you won't follow all the members anymore. I know this has happened with some larger K-pop groups, like older K-pop groups, and especially some other K-pop groups that have already disbanded and have already gone off to do their solo careers. So there's a very large, clear distinction between BTS, which is the rest of the K-pop industry, and then Army and the rest of K-pop fandoms.
Yeah.
But we all get lumped together, which sucks.
Yes, it really does. I also see that come up a lot too with conversations about things like fan sites, right? Where other groups tend to be more supportive of fan sites, whereas we have kind of a hard line against them.
Yeah.
So, interesting.
It's interesting you bring up fan sites though, because I very much see fan sites as kind of a relic of the past, where for a lot of newer fandoms, fan sites are kind of crucial because fan sites, they buy a lot of albums, or they might be part of like funding like fan bases that buy a lot of albums. They promote the group using their pictures, using their content, and they also pay a lot of money to go to fan signs and to do other things. So they are very crucial to a K-pop group's beginnings in that type of sense, especially in Korea, because essentially, basically, okay, this is a conversation I had with a lot of people, but a K-pop group cannot be successful if they are not successful in South Korea. They cannot just be successful internationally. It's like a very hard truth that a lot of people have to realize, because there's a lot of groups that are popular internationally, but they are not popular within Korea. And that is very much a sign to the companies as well. If you're not getting people buying hundreds of albums to go to a fan sign or anything like that, if you don't have a Korean fan base for your favorite K-pop group, it's not going to last long. And this has happened to multiple K-pop groups in the past. I'm not going to say names, but you can look it up yourself. If you can think of any K-pop group right now that is popular internationally, or ones in the past that were popular internationally, and then see where they are now. And you essentially know that those groups, since they did not have a South Korean fan base, they did not last. So it's kind of that aspect when it comes to talking about these fandoms. People just don't essentially understand the importance of South Korea sometimes in these conversations about K-pop. And it's very interesting as well. Sorry to jump off of that. Sorry, Kate. But to jump off of that, it's interesting to see how Army, we have a very good relationship with K armies, and other fandoms don't. They hate
Right.
the Korean side of their fandom, which is super racist, by the way, and xenophobic. I'm just throwing that out there. Like,
Yeah, that's
if
yeah.
you hate a certain group of your fandom just because they are from a particular country, that is xenophobic. Just straight up. Just straight up. It's you can't even excuse it. Be like, oh no, because they act like this and that. No, you are labeling an entire country, an entire group of people from a certain country as one thing. That is xenophobic. That is basic definition xenophobia. So don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that,
Yeah.
please.
But as armies, we have a good relationship with K armies. I believe we do. Even though there are some US armies that I have a problem with who try to be xenophobic towards Korean armies and act like that. We know who you are, and I'm not going to name names, but there are some larger US Army accounts on Twitter and other platforms that have this whole narrative around, oh, we shouldn't worship K armies. Well, duh, yeah. But then they take that to the extreme and try to label the entire country and people from that country, which is a whole issue.
That's an issue. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So to kind of get back to the bigger question of who are Army and getting into some of like the community aspects of it. I did deploy this survey.
Wait, are you allowed to share the data?
I'm not gonna share
Quotes? Okay.
I'm gonna generalize.
Okay.
I can share some of the data. It's all anonymized. I'm gonna be a little hand wavy because the stuff's not actually published yet. So anyway, it's fine. Everything's fine. So yeah, so this was a survey that I did like a while ago. So this was it might have even been pre-chapter 2.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
so the data is a little older, so I will give that caveat. And I got around 600 responses. So like, to give a mini lecture on research. So this is like very much the results of the survey are very much about my community and kind of my extended community, mostly on Twitter. I think that's where we got like 90% of the responses from. But the cool thing about this particular survey is that most of the questions were just open-ended questions. So people just left big, long stories and things in the responses. And so we have all this really lovely, rich qualitative data, which is different from running numbers. So there's no statistics in this. We're not doing any stats with this survey data. So this is more just like, imagine you were just asking a bunch of different people like what their Army experience was, and then they actually give you long, beautiful stories about it. That's basically what this survey was. So with all those caveats of like, this is going to be mostly people that are probably in some way connected to me, even if it's like by an extended network of like, there could be a couple hops in there if people shared this.
Yeah. Like English speaking.
Yeah, so they had to be able to speak. So the rules are, because ethics, they have to be able to speak English to respond to the survey, obviously, because the survey was in English. I required they be 18 or older. So anybody who said they were under 18, I deleted their data because I wanted adults only.
It's also a legal issue too, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a whole nother ball of wax with ethics. But yeah, I mean, mostly for me, I want people who were actually able to consent to understand where their data was being used. And so I want adults who have a pretty good grasp of English who could consent to their data being used. So that's kind of like the background there. Yeah, so one of the cool things about this is we got like some 600 responses, which is huge. It's absolutely, I recognize that it's like a very small number when we're talking about Army, but there's an absolutely huge number of responses from an online open-ended survey where people are supposed to just generate their own answers to things. It's a huge number of responses.
Yeah.
So like as an example, another survey I've deployed in the past to a different community, I got excited about 50 responses just as a like
Ooh.
50 was a lot at the time. And I was like, oh my God, I
Yeah.
have 50 responses. This is amazing. So getting 600 was actually overwhelming. I was like, how am I going to actually be able to go through all this data? Which is why I'm still working through it, even though I deployed the survey quite a while ago now, like a year and a half ago or something.
Yeah.
But so all of that, those were all my caveats. But so I've been working through this data, and there's like some very clear, interesting things about how people think about the community. There's actually a number of responses that were basically like, well, if you're not really a member of the community, you're not really an army. So there were a lot
Yeah.
of those kinds of responses of people being like, well, even if you say you're an army, but you're not really participating in army activities or not really being engaged with the community, then it's more like you're just a casual fan, which I thought was interesting. Like there was kind of some expectation of community activity and behavior.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to like highlight was a lot of the stuff, like while it's interesting, like what we see on Twitter and what gets spoken about a lot is, you know, all the like fan behavior, all the important fan behavior of supporting BTS. So like buying their albums, voting, streaming, you know, all the stuff that promotes BTS is obviously an important thing, but there's like other pillars of people's responses, and a lot of that was around loving and supporting each other as a community. And in here, when I'm talking about the community, I'm talking about ARMY and BTS. So like loving and supporting each other, so ARMY and BTS, and kind of engaging in self-love and learning to empower oneself. There's a lot of that. So like a lot of it is like my community is helping me, so I'm here because, you know, it's the sort of like I came here because of BTS, but I'm staying because ARMY and BTS are actually making me feel like making me be a better person, essentially. Yeah, so there's just like, and I'll say that a lot of the responses, like I actually cried because of some of the things people are talking about like, you know, the I was in a really dark place, and then I came here to this community, and you know, I basically have a reason to get up every day, kind of a thing. And for a lot of people also, there was this kind of like, you know, I'm here for the music, but there's a lot more than the music that I'm staying for. So I'm staying here for the community and for the other things that BTS gives me besides, on top of the music, basically.
Yeah.
But there was not a lot of stuff like, oh, you need to know everything about BTS, or oh, you need to like spend thousands of dollars. There's none of that. So it was all about,
No.
you know, all about that kind of shared values and commitment to caring for each other, and that commitment to, you know, helping one another, and kind of being here for the music and for that kind of community commitment.
Yeah. It's like when armies share GoFundMe's for like a surgery cost or something and it gets filled within like a couple hours.
Right. Yeah. So there's like a lot of like other stuff that happens besides, you know, just being a fan of the music, right? Or
Yeah.
music, which I think is really, really cool. Um,
Yeah. I can kind of speak on like my experience in fandom, but I used to not donate to people's GoFundMe's or anything because I was kind of burned a lot in other fandoms where it turned out people were scammers or they used the money for some type of other thing. Like there's this one time I donated to someone and then they bought like a laptop instead of doing their like prescription costs they said they were talking
right.
about. But Army was the first fandom where I felt like much more comfortable with donating and feeling more empowered to donate instead of like in a kind of healing from that time where I was burned and kind of taken advantage of in that moment. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah, no,
nice.
there's actually like a big, strong like thread of kind of the be a good human behavior, right? So
Yeah.
like we're like as a whole, we're like super charitable, right? we donate so much money all the time, and it's, it ranges from like these individual things to like community wide events and stuff. And there's a lot of care and a lot of support that comes that isn't just monetary, right? There's like a lot of,
Yeah.
you know, if someone's like, and I've done this myself, like, oh, I've just had a really terrible day. And then all of a sudden in my, inbox and my replies and stuff are flooded with, supportive messages and people reaching out. And,
Yeah.
there's just an investment in the community that, it's hard to say I've seen that. I have not seen it in that way in many of the other spaces that I've inhabited. So I don't know. It's just it's very wholesome, nice.
Yeah. That's so interesting that you talk about that because I've actually like as I've become an army longer, I like leaned away from trying to get emotional support from the fandom, which is interesting whole in my own like psyche and aspect. But I think as I do that, sometimes I wish that I felt more comfortable again, like when I first entered army to do that. But I feel like kind of with my position in the fandom and how there's like so many eyes on me sometimes. It's even just as like an admin for a funding fan base that I can't share those kind of vulnerable moments anymore. Like just recently, like one of my relatives passed away, and it's been very hard on my family, but I have not told anyone about that, except I guess now where I am revealing it. But it's been very hard emotionally, and I haven't talked about it. And I think, well, will there ever be a time again where I feel comfortable talking about those types of things on Twitter?
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point in that I think that the way someone, and you can probably, you can for sure watch this evolution happen as an account gets bigger, of like
Yeah.
their shift in language and how they choose to present themselves and what they choose to talk about changes. Because yeah, it feels significantly different when you have 100 followers and you kind of have your little bubble, right, of like just
Yeah.
a handful of people, and you like can basically more or less know everyone that's interacting with you, right? Versus, as you can, it almost feels like, I feel like there's, at least for me, this is how it felt, like there was like tiers of like, oh, I just hit, like I'm trying to remember, like 800 followers. It felt like I had flipped into some new realm of like, well, now I'm kind of really public.
Yeah.
And now I don't actually know how many followers I have right now.
You have like over 1K. I know.
Oh, yeah, no,
You're like 2K, 4K?
let me, yeah.
Flex the number, Kate. Flex the number.
5,299 followers.
Wow.
Well, yeah, no, so it's an interesting, and clearly I pay attention to these things.
Yeah.
To go look it up. But yeah, no, so I feel like there's like some like level of, yeah, I don't know, I'm a little bit weird in that I'm a fairly open book in terms of my current state of mood, but I've always been like that. That's not like indicative of anything. But I do know that there was a time, and like I said, it was like in the 800 1K range where I like was like, oh, this is like something like more than just my little group of friends is seeing, and I need to be more careful about what I'm boosting. I need to be more careful about what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And and you just like you start to kind of, yeah, I don't know. And then it was like, for me, it was around the like, yeah, maybe it was around the 2K. I don't know, there was somewhere in there. The 2K, 4K range. I don't even know. Because apparently I didn't even know I had 5,000 followers. I started moving a lot of things into DMs.
Yeah.
And creating, I have like a couple of different little group chats that are like my important safe spaces. Where I can actually talk about real stuff instead of the like filtered version that I put on the timeline. So I think that's also interesting because like, at least for me, because I actually think very deeply about what it means for us to be a community. Like that's literally what I like spend my time thinking about.
Yeah.
Get paid to think about what makes us a community.
Yeah.
I am very, very reflexive of, okay, if I put this out into the community, then I am reinforcing these parts of our community. And so it's important to me to like have a balance of like playful, fun, caring content where I am putting out good vibes onto the timeline versus elevating important issues that I think need to be addressed, or at least people need to be thinking about in some way. And I try to like find a balance where I'm not like, not increasing the drama necessarily, but there are times where I'm like, man, people really need to think about this and maybe put their thoughtful hats on for a second versus, good vibes.
Yeah. I keep seeing you like put out threads about current events. And I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, go Kate,
yeah, I do
which
that.
is so interesting to me. Like, I know we talked about this before, but like I feel like ever since I started following you more and retweeting you, because I retweet everything, um, my a lot of my moods has started interacting and following you, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh man, I done it again. Like my like there's like a joke between my moods and I where sometimes I'll bring new people to join our circle
Uh-huh.
and be included in our community and like all the moods and the extended
Yeah.
moods and like that. And it's like, dang it, Crystal did it again. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, new friend, new person. But in a way, like what you're talking about with the 800K, 200K type of thing. Like I've only recently hit like 800, around 870
Uh-huh.
followers, and for a long time I really denied like followers. Like I used to do this thing where I would do Russian roulette with my followers, and I'd be like, okay guys, I'm a Russian roulette my followers, and I would just scroll and then block someone and
Wow.
scroll and block someone. And I told people, I was like, yeah, don't follow me. And I was like first it was like 500, no, 420,
Uh-huh.
it was 420. And I
Uh,
said, I'm stopping at 420 followers. If you follow me after 420 followers, I'm gonna block you. So I did that for a little while,
wow.
and then I raised it to 500 because there was a lot of threads I had that were popping off, and then people
Yeah.
wanted to hear what I had to say. So I was like, okay, I'm raising it to 500. And I was like, okay, guys, I'm a Russian roulette you after 500. And then I raised it to 777 because I was like, oh, yeah,
Uh-huh.
777, BTS. And then more people followed me because I did Army Questions Saturday,
Uh-huh.
and more people follow me. And then I was like, dang it. Yeah, as I grow into a bigger account, it's interesting to see how I change and how my response to things change. Because now, oh my God, I remember I wrote this thread about like homophobia within the community and how some people were being very homophobic. And then someone was like, why are you talking about this? And they asked me like a bunch of random questions, and I got so annoyed. I just deleted the thread because I was like, I honestly, it's like someone I didn't even follow, and they didn't even follow anyone that I knew. And it was like, why are you being annoying? Why are you here? So I like deleted everything and then I blocked them because I was like, I don't want to deal with that. And it's like that's happening more frequently now, where like random people that I don't even follow or are not even in my circles are like interacting with my tweets and
Oh yeah.
trying to talk to me, or try to talk to me as if I know them. And it's like I don't even know who you are, and you're coming into like I say this a lot on Twitter, but I'm like, why are you in my house?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and I don't know, how do you feel about that, Kate? You must
No,
get that
I
a
like
lot.
yeah, no. I think I think that like it's a really interesting point, and like maybe part of the point we're trying to make here about community is that, you know, up until a certain person bought out Twitter, having one's community fairly locked down on Twitter, for example, was like more or less easy to do. And the algorithm is now totally broken. So it's not nearly as easy to kind of curate your space as it used to be. So there's that going on. So there's like technological things going on under the hood that are just like totally screwing up like how we have been developing our community. But I also think it's a really interesting point of like, if you, even if you're not a big account, if you just have a thread or a tweet that goes viral, but yeah, so like whenever you have a tweet that goes off, you will get a bunch of people seeing it who aren't like part of your little community, right? So like there's
Yeah.
like I visualize it as kind of bubbles, and I've actually attempted to map this out at some point because I've seen this happen both with stuff I've done on Twitter and TikTok. So it's interesting to see kind of the similarities and differences. But like, you basically, if you get a certain amount of retweets or posts, you can kind of envision it as like concentric enlarging circles. Like, you think of it like rings of a tree or something, where
Yeah.
you kind of pop into the next level of circles, and then that many more people will see it, kind of exponentially grows. And so you can see like, oh, I just got 50 reposts, and then it pops into the next circle, and then all of a sudden it blows up, and you got like that much more visibility until you kind of blow up and blow up and blow up. And then at some point it kind of dies down, and you don't make it to the next like concentric circle, if you will. But
Yeah.
each time you fall into one of those circles, you're hitting more and more people that don't follow you or you don't interact with. Like, they're people outside you, like they're the friends of a friend kind of a thing, or people who are seeing it on the timeline. And so with each of those concentric circles, then you're increasing the likelihood that you're going to get randos commenting on it.
Yeah.
And for the most part, those stay fairly innocuous. Like, I'll have things where people are just like, oh yes, this is great, or agree, or, they're just trying to chime in and add to like the fray, if you will.
Yeah.
And then, unless it's something that's like people are disagreeing with, and then that's a whole nother thing where it turns into like a quote storm, and people are quoting it instead of commenting, and things like that. But yeah, but then I agree that like you'll get these random people then, especially as things get more and more views, you get these random people who will come in and try to start something, and it's often really unclear if they actually care, or if they're just there for the engagement, or if they like, and so oftentimes I'll just ignore them. That's
Yeah.
my MO, is I'll just like, if it's somebody being extremely obnoxious and harmful, I'll block them. If they're just
Yeah.
randomly weird and just don't know how to socialize on the platform, then I just ignore them, pretend I didn't see it. It's hard because like when you have someone in your replies versus somebody who's quoting you, it's a little bit different. Because if they're in your replies, you can't delete their reply. So it's there no matter who else comes and sees the tweet, right? And so I find that really frustrating. Like, there's the hide feature, but it doesn't work that well. So if I block them, I feel weird because I've blocked them. I can't see it anymore, but I know other people still can. And so that makes it very weird. Anyway, so there's like some weird safety issues with the tech that I have thoughts about. But I do think that, yeah, I think it's an interesting, like, especially if you got somebody who's, depends on how controversial the original thread was or whatever, but like, if you got people in your replies who are being harmful to you, that is a hard thing to deal with, especially if other people then start engaging with it, and then your notifications get flooded because you've got people like actually fighting with them and stuff, but it keeps popping up in your notifications, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I agree. I find it really hard to figure out like where my lines are with dealing with that kind of stuff. But I also, for me, part of it is like, yes, there's the harm and the whatever that's happening to me in those moments, and the awkwardness and the weird socialization that's happening with these randos for me. But then I also try to think about like, what is this doing to my community, and what is this doing to the people who are following me? If I'm replying to someone and people have notifications on for me, they're like suddenly in that conversation. And do I want to be inviting people into these different weird conversations? So mostly I just ignore stuff. Yeah.
I think that's the smartest move, honestly. Like, you just choose to not engage with people who want to clearly be there in bad faith type of vibe.
Right.
Yeah. Because I don't know.
You can usually
tell.
Because they're usually there to say something controversial.
Yeah. But it's so weird sometimes because it's like you make a thread. Like, there's a thread I made that shared like archives, right? And this was, by the way, this is all archives of official content. There wasn't archives where it's like paid content or anything on it. And there's this one person who came into my replies and tried to like make a problem with like sharing archive material and content. Like, and I was like, this is all just official content. And it's like just pictures from like BTS's social media
Right.
like
Right.
Weibo and Twitter and Instagram and like that. And it's so strange when people come into spaces without any context, without anything, and they just like want to make a problem. It's
Yeah.
like I have no idea who you are. You have no idea who I am, but you come in here, you try to act like you can control the room now, which
Yeah.
is crazy. Which that's why I always see it as like my house. Like my profile is my house. Like,
Right.
and when people are weird or crazy, I'm just like, why are you in my house? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think of mine, and this is going to be the professor in me, but I think of mine more like not a classroom, but more like if I was like out in the park with all my friends and we were having like a little town circle. It's my little town circle, where like I'm
Yeah.
talking, but other people are talking, and you'll occasionally get some random person walking through. And like it's okay as long as they're not there to like, start something, right? And like
Yeah.
I'm the sort of like I intentionally made my account so that it was welcoming and I want new people to feel like they're included and stuff, which is why I don't randomly block people. Um different choices, it's
Two
fine.
choices. Yeah.
But I don't like, to me it's like if somebody comes in and starts fighting or saying harmful things, I immediately think, oh God, I have to protect the rest of the people that are here with me.
Yeah.
And I've not been given all the tools I need to do that. The other thing that I have found, speaking of like Army community, the other thing that I have found really nice about the way I guess the way I've curated my space, I don't know, is that oftentimes if I have somebody coming into my replies and saying something really atrocious or something just like off the wall wrong or
Yeah.
whatever, I usually like will be like, I'm just going to pause and wait. And usually I will have a mutual who will reply for me. So
Yeah.
I'll just be like, no, I'm just gonna wait until one of my more vocal friends comes in and corrects them or whatever. And it usually happens. Like there's usually someone who's like, oh no, I'm not gonna let this fly, and then they take care of it.
Yeah.
So it's nice knowing that a little bit, at least I have people like who will kind of like we kind of step in and help each other out when those things start happening.
Yeah. And that goes back to like how the community we help each other.
Yeah.
That's one of the ways we do it.
That's one of the one of
Yeah.
the ways we support is being like, oh no, we're not going to let that fly under these replies. And
Yeah.
you know, I I'm all for those kinds of activities as long as it doesn't turn into a dog pile. I don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that usually, like at least with my moots and stuff, we keep things fairly civil. So
Mm.
more or
That's
less.
so interesting. Like contrasting from my moods. Like there's sometimes where they're dogpiling someone and I'm like, guys, hold back. It's like this person, I think they get it now that they were in the wrong. Like like there's I don't know. It's like different things. And also it's interesting how like we differ in how we view our community spaces. Cause I see it as like a very intimate space. Like it's my house. Like
Yeah,
there's like walls, it's enclosed. So when
yeah,
someone walks in randomly, I'm like, who are you?
yeah,
You know? But for you see it kind of more like a town hall community space where like people
yeah,
can enter and leave and kind of there's
yeah,
more openness there.
yeah.
But I think that's just kind of contrasting of how like our follower accounts work too. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I like, for me, I stepped into this space. Well, yes, I stepped into this space knowing that I was going to behave a certain way and then I was going to present myself a certain way because I am a researcher and I'm actually here with research intentions on top of being.
yeah.
Remember? And so like, and I actually think about that a lot too when I'm like blocking people and stuff. Like I don't run blockchains. There's a lot of things I don't do because
Wow. You
I've
don't
never run a blockchain in my life.
Wow.
So I'm very, very intentional. If I've blocked someone, there's a very good reason I've blocked them.
Yeah.
And I don't randomly block people. Yeah. No, so because to me, I'm, if you're part of my space, then there's potential that I'm going to be talking about you anonymously, not obviously not calling you out. Like I'm very, very careful about how I write about my space. So that
Yeah.
people don't get like called out in random articles and stuff. But like there is the knowledge that I am using this space to share with the world what we're doing in these spaces. And if you aren't comfortable with that, you should be blocking me. But I feel like it's not fair to necessarily block other people who might want to actively engage with me in terms of talking about the academic portions of it. If they have concerns and they need to reach out to me, they need to be able to reach out to me. So
Yeah.
I block a lot more on my fan account, but like my academic account is fairly open to people.
Mm.
So because I feel like people need to be able to have access to me in some way if they have concerns about the research. So
Yeah.
it goes back to like community ethical research based stuff. And I have put a lot of thought into this.
Yeah. Very much you have used your account for research and kind of like your academic work, but the account that I use primarily is very much just my fan account. Like I live tweet concerts when we watch them. So like all the D-Day concert, you could just see me like with each song. Oh my god, best song!
Oh yeah,
The
yeah,
best song.
yeah. I have that with my fan account too, and
Yeah.
like, yeah. So I also live tweet with my account, and it's like my propensity for swearing. It goes up during the concerts. Like you can see, you can probably graph it how much I
Yeah.
swear during my live tweet versus my regular day to day.
Like, oh shit.
Yeah, like I have like so much. No, it's really funny. Because like you can kind of tell when I off the cuff and like impulsively tweeting stuff. Like I often will also live tweet when like things drop or comebacks or whatever,
Yeah.
like music videos or whatever. But so it's like funny because I feel like sometimes people come because I write these really intellectual, interesting, thought-provoking threads that like have all this like I spend okay, this is going to be interesting. I spend days crafting the longer threads. I spend days in docs,
Wow.
like thinking about it, and then like, is this really what I want to say? And I like I put as much thought into my threads as I do like an academic paper.
Oh.
And so yeah, so like when I don't respond to an issue or something right away, it's because I'm actually putting a lot of thought into it. It's not that I'm ignoring it. Anyway, so you can really tell the difference between those and that. And so I feel like people come when one of those threads goes viral, right? When one of those threads like pops off. People come for that like intellectual
Goodness.
thought, and then they are left with me crying and screaming and swearing on the timeline when something drops. So, they get all of
It's
it.
it's the economy. That's why, but this goes back to larger conversations we had before. But I trust academics who have fan accounts where they yell and scream more than academics who don't. like
That's good to
like
know.
I need to see you losing it a little in order to trust you. So we have some real vulnerability.
Well, I have that in spades, so I guess there's that.
Yeah. Well, also to go back to like how we talk about like viralness, what do you qualify as viral on Army Twitter? You have no
I
idea.
have no idea.
Wow. I think our space is too big.
I think our space is way too big. I think like, and I've lost all perspective because
Yeah.
when I just had my academic account, I mean, I never had anything pop off ever, almost never. Like I'm trying to think. The biggest thing I ever had happen to me was when I wrote about a video game and I said some really controversial stuff and trolls found me. And even that only got like 15,000 views.
Yeah.
And that was intense at the time. I was like, well, this is a ride. I never want to do this again. I also really hate, like, speaking of virality, I really hate it when things pop off. I have such anxiety about it. But anyways,
Yeah. We've
yeah,
talked
so
about
like,
that before.
yeah. So like when, and maybe it's because the first time it ever happened to me, I was like getting death threats in my inbox and stuff. But anyways, that's what I get for saying controversial things on the internet. But that was like the first time that had really happened to me, and I think that was like 15,000 views, and there was quite a high engagement because of trolling and stuff. So anyway,
Yeah.
so then on Army Twitter, I like have no perspective of like what is normal anymore. And so like I think, you know, one of my tweet threads, the one about the Panopticon, has like some 800,000 views, almost a million. I can't actually remember now where it hit.
Wow.
Like almost a million views. And I was trying to explain this to some of the academics at a, like, we were at a workshop like 2 days after it started, like after it went viral. I was explaining to them and they like literally could not comprehend those numbers. They were like, I was like, yeah. So I wrote this whole thread about Foucault and the Panopticon, and you know, and it got all these hits, and they're just looking at me like, what happened now?
Yeah.
And so there's just like there's no connection to reality basically on Army Twitter. I don't know. So anyways, but that yeah, that was abnormal to get that many hits for me. So I don't even but I don't have a good like, and like as my follower count has increased, my threshold for like, oh, this is really popping off has like also gone higher, because things automatically get more views now than they did before. But like I like honestly don't recommend it.
No.
I actually really hate it a lot, especially when things really start heating up. I'm just like, okay, maybe like I have done this where like, you know, something keeps showing up in my notifications, so I just mute it. So I have no idea what certain threads are doing anymore, because I'm just like, all right, I've hit my emotional capacity for dealing with this thread, turning notifications off so people can keep having their discourse, but I'll be over here blithely unaware that it's happening.
No, but that's so interesting to me, because like when it comes to tweets popping off, I like to monitor it. So
yeah,
like I'm like constant, there's still tweets that I have that like get likes and retweets and quote retweets still, and I'm just like, Hawkeyes, like what are you doing? Like,
yeah. See,
where are you doing
I used to be more like that, and I think I finally took the like, okay, this is not good for my mental health. Especially it's not everything. Some things I enjoy watching, like the discourse and the quote.
Yeah.
I enjoy it. But there's other things where I'm like, okay, well, I've said my piece. I'm not going to keep arguing about this. If you want to keep arguing about this, go ahead. But I've said my piece, so I'm going to just move on. And I usually will say that, I'll even reply to the thread and be like, all right, I'm muting this now, bye.
Yeah.
So like, if you really want to talk to me about this, find a different way, because it's not going to be through this thread. So yeah, but I feel like that has been really good for my mental health.
Oh my God. We're gonna talk about this later.
Yes.
In the episode.
That's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I do think there's like an interesting thing about, you know, the ways in which the technology and the platform really influence how the community is created and how the community gets maintained, right? So like, all this discussion about like, you know, how we interact with people and the kinds of people that interact with us, like, is all heavily influenced by the platform we're on. And each platform that Army inhabits has very, very different like infrastructure in terms of how people can actually interact. And so I like that really, you know, where you were talking about Twitter versus Tumblr, and like those platforms have very, very different ways for people to actually engage with one another. And there's different ways, like, understand how people are engaging with you, because like on Tumblr you don't see anything. There's no visibility into like, are people seeing this post? I don't know. So like, you know, you get this like more of a I'm screaming into the void and maybe someone someday will interact with me vibe, versus like Twitter, where you can actually monitor all the statistics because they're right there. Like, it's very different.
It's so interesting. Like, I think because I've been on Tumblr for a long time, I am pre 2017 NSFW ban Tumblr person, and being on Tumblr for a long time, it's very interesting to see how things have changed. Because I think pre the ban, it was way more active, and like the whole I can't describe it sometimes to people how Tumblr was pre the ban, because it was so active and there's so many people and it was very much like thriving in a way. But then after the ban, it was like this whole fall off point of like user activity. And like I was still there and I still had friends who I talked to, but it was like nothing basically. To see like communities develop and kind of how that affects the communities there is very interesting, especially when it comes to Army, because I feel like the Tumblr community on Army is so enclosed and small, and just like if anyone has drama in Army Tumblr, everyone knows. Everyone knows because that's just because it's such a small community, like especially because they're all connected through Discord servers too. So that's another T thing as well. So yeah, it's interesting to think about our different communities, and this goes back to a larger question as well, like what is an army? It's all contextual at the end of the day. Yeah. Because we want to kind of wrap this up. It's been a little while, but any final thoughts on what is an army, Kate?
Final thoughts. Well, I think that like the like my final thoughts are you do you. If you want to like you like live your best army life, right? And I think that like the places you choose to be in your army community and how you interact with your army community are going to very much impact your army experience as a whole. And that if you are somewhere where it's not working for you, try somewhere else. Like there's just like, you know, there are options out there. You don't if you find Twitter to be too dramatic and too whatever, then try different platforms, right? Or if you don't, you know, or if you don't like the silence that often happens on Tumblr, then try different platforms.
Yeah, Reddit is good.
Yeah, you know? like yeah, there's like lots of different places, and like there's offline places too, like go to like a cup sleeve or, you know, whatever, try to find people doing a meetup or organize your own meetup maybe.
Yeah, it's fun.
Super fun. So like there's different ways to kind of go about it, and I think that, you know, I think for me, I'm not going to waste my energy shaming people for doing it the wrong way unless they're being harmful to other people. In that case, I would shame them a little bit because you should not hurt other people. And that includes other army and BTS.
Yeah, I get that. And just to add on like kind of my final thoughts as well, very much if you can be an army, if you call yourself an army, if you don't, but just don't speak on things that you don't understand. So like if you're an army and there's people talking about streaming and you don't understand anything about streaming, don't say, well, I don't stream and I don't think streaming is important. Don't say that because you're very much not within the context of that community of armies. So that's not a place for you to speak on. But if you want to speak on like maybe you draw fan art as an army and that's something you can really speak on, then speak on that, you know? It's just about being considerate and understanding kind of different people's places in the fandom and how at the end of the day, we all are here in support of BTS and to love BTS. And also controversial opinion that I won't elaborate on anymore in this episode, but very much the transformative part of fandom that writes fan fiction and does fan art and fan edits. All of them are important to our community as well. It is not just streaming, buying, and voting that is important to BTS.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yes.
Take. I'll second that. Stay tuned for a later episode.
Yeah, stay tuned for a later episode. Thank you all so much for watching this podcast, listening to this podcast.
You keep saying watching.
Well, reading this podcast. You could be reading the transcript right now. Very cool.
Thanks for participating in this podcast experience.
Yeah, thanks for participating. Yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you for being Army. Have a wonderful day. And remember to stream BTS, stream all the songs, string albums top to bottom. You know, we got to do the whole thing, the whole spiel. Stream them, vote, buy, make creative things, and have a wonderful day.
Have a wonderful day. Bye.